Let us pray. O God of peace, who hast taught us that in returning and rest we shall be saved, in quietness and in confidence shall be our strength. By the light of thy Spirit, lift us to thy presence, where we may be still and know that you art God. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Again, welcome to Women Together at St. Paul's. There's a few people still coming in. The theme for Women Together is being a Christian woman in a diverse world. During this series, we explore ways to deepen our faith as we interact with the rest of the world. We're happy that you can come and share this journey with us. A special welcome to women attending for the first time. There are 7 meetings a year on the first Thursday of the month between October and May. Go to the Women Together webpage on the stpaulcathedral.org website for information about upcoming talks. And as many of you know, Women Together is not something you join. You watch for publicity each month. You sign up by the Monday prior to the meeting and you attend the meeting. We send you a Zoom link right now because meetings are held on Zoom, and eventually someday we'll be meeting in person again, and we look forward to that. I want to say a big thank you to all the dedicated volunteers and the cathedral staff and clergy who make these events happen. Without all their hard, dedicated work, we wouldn't be able to hold them. So thank you very much to all of our volunteers and our staff. So let me go on to introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Oliva Espin. She's a professor emerita at the Department of Women's Studies at San Diego State University and the California School of Professional Psychology of Alliant International University. Dr. Espin was a pioneer in the practice and theory of feminist therapy with women from different cultural backgrounds. A native of Cuba, she received her BA in psychology from the University of Costa Rica and her PhD from the University of Florida. She did postdoctoral work at Harvard University with a fellowship from NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health. Dr. Espin held a Fulbright Distinguished Chair in Gender Studies at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria. She has taught psychology of women, psychology of immigrants and refugees, issues of privilege and oppression, and other topics. She has presented at national and international conferences and published articles and books on women immigrants and refugees, language in therapy with fluent bilinguals, historical memory and memoir, and feminist psychological understandings of women saints. She recently published Gender Journeys, Women, Migration, and Feminist Psychology in 2015, and Women's Sainthood and Power, a Feminist Psychology of Cultural Constructions in 2019. Her most recent book is My Native Land is Memory, Stories of a Cuban Childhood in 2020. So without further ado, here is our wonderful speaker, Oliva Espin.
Thank you, Virginia. And hello to all the people who I know. I'm seeing more familiar faces in the square, but I don't have time to say hello to everyone individually. So hi, Nancy and Sharon and Pat and etc. Okay, so let's do the sharing screen here. Here it is. And let me start the slideshow. And during this time, you basically will hear my voice, and maybe you may have me in a little image on the side. Okay, so we're talking about gender journeys, women's experience of migration. And First thing is to know that never before in human history have so many people lived outside their country of birth. Immigration is not a new phenomenon, but the numbers of people who are migrating are staggering. It is estimated that there are approximately 244 million immigrants worldwide, of which about half are women and girls, which is who we are going to be talking about. So there's a global migration emergency, a global displacement emergency, and I don't have time. We cannot go through each one of these squares, but the last right bottom, 34,000 people were displaced from their home per day in the year 2015, which is where this data are from. And the majority of immigrants are from Iraq, Syria, Nigeria, Sudan, and the Republic of Congo. The reason people are migrating is because of persistent violence. And these two slides, the one before and this one now, are from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. So this is the data from the people they're treating and working with, and particularly in terms of people from Honduras, Mexico, El Salvador, etc. These exposures to physical violence and threat and seeing people dead in the street, etc., that motivates people feeling that they need to flee. When we go specifically to refugees, there's a worldwide crisis of refugees. The biggest thing with this clock we have here is that nearly 20 people every minute are forced to flee their homes because of conflict and persecution. Women, as I said before, women and girls account for half of international migrants, and 16% of them are under the age of 20. And even though popular opinion still perceives the immigrant as male, the reality is that migration has taken on a gender dimension. I tried to use this graph, which is really very impressive, but it's very blurry. So I just put this link here where I got that this graphic that you're seeing on your right, and we will see another graphic also from the same link. So I'll leave it there for a second if you want to copy the link. It's the number of females international migrant in 2013, and basically what they're talking about is the feminization of migration and the similarity between the feminization of poverty, feminization of work, and the fact that women immigrants are in positions where there's very chance to move out and be safe and improve their lives too much. Although, interestingly, the educational attainments of women who are immigrants, and particularly their daughters, are fairly high and equivalent to what we find in most of the states. So that's okay. So let me go to the next one. In terms of, if you look at these two lines, since the year 2000, women immigrants have increased, the number of women increased in the US, even though they have decreased in the world. So it's an interesting thing to, but even when we're talking about their increasing from the year 2000, it's still not as high as it was in the 1980s. it continues to be lower than what women immigration was back there. And this is data from the Census Bureau. Okay, so immigrant women and girls outnumber men and boys. There are 23 million female immigrants in the US in 2018, which are more than half, 51.8%, so 52% of the total foreign-born population. And when we're talking about foreign-born population, some of the people included here are people like me, who are foreign-born, but I have been a citizen for years. So am I classified for decades? Am I classified as an immigrant or am I classified as a citizen? It's hard to know, but I'm part of that female foreign-born population. And this goes from both kinds of migrations, the numbers of women. In legal migration, women are 52%. In unauthorized migration, then there tends to be a larger number of men, but still the proportion of women is very, very high. As you can see, it's almost half. So in 1982, about 48% of legal admittances in the country were female. By 2004, they were 54%. And that trend has continued. And then since 1990, again, number of admissions, etc., the proportion of female immigrants from Mexico and Central America who have never been married has increased since 1980. And this is important because we tend to think, and in fact, there are some figures we'll see that are saying that women are migrating. And when we think of women migration, people usually think families, but there are a number of women who migrate alone. And this is actually not a completely new trend. In the 19th century, there were a number of particularly Irish and German single young women who came to the States to work as servants, and they sort of supported their country of origin. Right now, a lot of women from Guatemala, particularly, but other places in Central America and the Philippines are pretty much sustaining their countries with their remittances. And something that it's interesting, if you look at the very last paragraph here, is that in 2018, immigrant women in the labor force earned less than any other group, native-born women, foreign-born men, and native-born men. And of course, we know that women earn less than men in all categories of population. So that's not, including white women, that's not any different for them. But what is interesting is that they earn less than other populations, and they earn less of men, and they send more money to their own country than they're much more reliable remitters. And in the process of doing this, they're elevating the level of education and living conditions and etc. in their own country. So that's, and we'll get back to that later. Okay, according to the United Nations created recently an agenda for the year 2030 for sustainable development. They do it for every, they started, this is from 2015, so every 15, 10, 20 years, they create, okay, so what are we gonna do for the future? And one of the things they had on their list of important things to do, I think it was item number 5 in the whole list, was to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. I spoke at the UN about women immigration in 2018. And so I looked a lot at information from the US, from the UN, I'm sorry, from the United Nations. And this is one of the things that sort of jumped at me. They also have a report on violence against women workers that is from 2017. And there's a sentence there that there's an urgent need to better respond to the gender dimensions of migration. So this is something that is happening in this country, the preoccupation with immigration and women immigrants, etc. But it's also something that is worldwide. The UN is very involved and concerned about the situation of these millions of women who are migrating all over the world. This is something I wanted. It's a very nice video that sort of reproduces this, but I wasn't able to wake up the video, so it's not there. What this does is it shows us from 1820 to 2010 where people came to this country. And of course, the majority is the yellow column. It's Europeans. It's pretty much 40 million people from Europe, followed by people from North and South America, meaning basically Mexico, Central America, and South America, or Caribbean, including Cuba, for example. And these are more recent in terms of years, which is what I wanted the previous video that I couldn't wake up, as I said, so you would see how the places where people come are changing. But still, even now, the majority of immigrants are, or the big chunk of immigrants to the US is from Europe. So the foreign-born population by region of birth, almost 40 million foreign-born people resided in the US in 2010, according to the census. And mostly they are from the Americas. You can see that it's a 55% from the Americans. Then Asia, which means Chinese, Vietnamese, Koreans, etc. And also Indians, Pakistanis, etc. Because in terms of continent, that's also Asia. There's still a number of people coming from Europe, some from Oceania, which is, from Australia and the islands around there, and then a small proportion from Africa. And these are figures, again, based on the 2010 census. In terms of immigrant and emigrant populations by country, the brownish beige colors are people who leave, and the bluish dark blue colors are people who come in. And you can see that there are lots of people going to Europe, but also to places in South America and in South Africa and Australia, New Zealand, etc. Those are countries that receive immigrants, and there are other countries that mostly send immigrants. In 20 metropolitan areas that have the largest number of immigrants in the US, one of them is San Diego, as you can see in the map. But it's about between 1 million and 500,000, as opposed to places like New York and LA that get larger groups, and Miami of immigrants. So the foreign-born population in the US, again, it's mostly from the Americas right now, even though there are people who come from other places in the world, as we saw in that in those circles. So migration, why do people migrate? Well, migration implies hope. People want things to be different. They're willing to take risks to do it. And of course, we can make a distinction between true immigrants, whatever that means, people who want to migrate who make a plan to migrate, and refugees who do not have much choice. But those lines are very blurry. It's very hard to know if someone is migrating for economic reasons or avoiding violence. And usually the people who have to run away from violence are the poorest ones. So it's hard to make a clear distinctions. And yet it's very clear that the legal conditions that determine if a person would be accepted in a country as an immigrant or a refugee have a lot to do with what is happening in their countries of origin and the possibility of being able to plan or not. But even refugees, even people who are running away from something, they're running away because they're hoping that it would be better. There are people who are under the same horrible conditions who don't go anywhere. So obviously it's someone who's trying to make things better in some way or avoiding violence or other things. And migration always implies a risk. Even when eagerly sought, migration is usually not a smooth process. Migration is a highly stressful experience that influences immigrants and refugees' well-being, and it can produce profound psychological distress, even among the most motivated and well-prepared individuals, and even when we are receiving them very willingly, whoever the host society is, it's always a stressful experience. And, you know, all of us have immigrant ancestors, unless we are Native Americans. And the stories we hear, if we heard any stories, are, oh, you know, I came here and yeah, I had a hard time, but everything got perfect. We don't really know how stressful it really was for those ancestors. And we think that it's different to the people who are coming now. For example, you know, the most despised populations in this country at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, were Italians, Poles, Jews, and the heirs of those people, you may be some of the heirs of those people, and in a relatively comfortable position at this point in comparison to the new immigrants we are seeing. And I don't know if any of you has had a chance to see the Tenement Museum in New York. They use apartments where people really lived as museums, and you can see that it was not a very enjoyable place to be. And I, you know, what one of my grandparents on my mother's side immigrated from Spain to Cuba at the end of the 19th century. And my grandfather made money. I mean, he was a success story. So apparently everything was fine. And yet when he sat down, when I was a girl and he was already an old man, and he started telling what he had gone through, it was clearly that it had not been easy. So it's not that the migrants now are any worse in terms of who they are. It's that we think about our ancestors with a different perspective because we hear the good consequences of their migration rather than hearing the suffering and how they were despised and attacked. And, you know, there were places in Boston that had signs, no dogs, no Irish, etc. You know, so this is the reaction against immigrants is not new. People tend to think that we're better than those who came from the outside, and then it changes and things become different. Anyway, some years ago, I sort of developed a model that there are several stages in the process of migration. This is something I published in 1987. And basically that migration psychologically, from the perspective of making the decision, the geographical move and the acculturation adaptation that happens after you migrate, There are different things that happen at each one of those stages. And by the way, I do a whole, or I used to do a whole semester course on each one of these, things. So I'm rushing you through 45 minutes of something that was a whole semester. So it's probably a bit too rushed, but anyway. So at each stage, at both the decision-making stage, the geographical move, and the acculturation stage, there are differences in experience for women and men, and certainly from transgender people, and for immigrants and refugees. And they experience each stage in a different way. Okay, so at the decision stage, who decides when to migrate, where to migrate, and how? And for many women, who we say it's family reunification, or they are coming with their husbands, or that kind of thing. For many women in many places in the world, the important emotional support is not the husband. The important emotional support is women networks. My mother, my sisters, my cousins, my aunts, my nieces, etc. And when you migrate, because we let, say, a nuclear family migrate, or a woman migrates because of her husband wanting to migrate, etc., the networks are being lost. And raising children in many countries of the world is a collective enterprise. All the women in the family raise the children. And then they get here and they find themselves in an apartment in the 30th floor of a building in New York, having to take care of the kids by themselves with any other woman's support. And that, of course, creates a lot of distress. And then when we're thinking about refugees do not have much decision power. Sometimes they cannot decide which country to go. It's the country that receives them. When my family left Cuba, my father and my siblings had visas, so they came to the States. My mother and I didn't, so we ended up in Spain. And we spent a number of months in Spain until we finally were able to get here. And we were very lucky because these were times back there and then, and Cubans have always received a very good welcome in this country for the most part. So all that made it not so difficult, but some refugees end up in places where they couldn't even imagine that those places existed. And okay, so immigrant women have a number of reasons for migrating. And as I said, the assumption is that they're coming to join immediate relatives who are citizens, their families sponsor them, etc. So we tend to have this assumption about their family reasons. Many of them are, but it's certainly very important that many of them, as I said before, are also coming to become the support of the family background. So in addition to economic needs or political needs from running from violence, and other some of the reasons why women migrate, social, meaning gender constraints, are important cause of migration for women. Marital discord, physical violence, unhappy marriages, inability of divorce, as well as other instances of sexual gender oppression influence women's decisions to migrate. So women migrate for the same reasons as men, but they also migrate for these reasons, trying to be safe from violence that is specifically directed at women. So is a woman fleeing marital violence in a country where the legal system does not protect her a voluntary immigrant coming from economic reasons, or is she a refugee fleeing a situation of danger? And, these lines are very blurry because economic danger and other forms of violence mix. So it's very hard to really sometimes say. And sometimes also from a psychological perspective, I may be classified as an immigrant for economic reasons, but psychologically, I'm feeling like a refugee running away from something. The lived experience of immigrants and refugees is shaped by gender power differentials in the country of origin, a response in the US or whatever the country may be in the mainstream. So whatever ways in which women are interacting and received are, you know, um, in their own country and in the place of reception. Okay, the right to asylum for domestic violence, genital mutilation, rape, or other forms of sexual violence is recognized internationally. And by the US, it's been recognized since the mid-1990s. But courts tend to trivialize, marginalize, and depoliticize issues of gender and sexuality. Issues relevant to women and to gender minorities are not seen as political persecution, but as things that are private and cultural. Even in the best of circumstances, the asylum process is long and difficult. But okay, so we know domestic violence, that's an internal problem in the home. But when so many women have an internal problem in the home, it's clearly something that has to do with society. And that's true for this country and any country in the world. But it tends to be, as I said, trivialized or worse. Okay, then the second stage is the geographical move of relocation. And along the migratory journey, women and girls face a heightened risk of abuse, extortion, and sexual and gender-based violence, particularly at border crossings. And this is again from the UN report on violence against women migrants. One of these people who are making their money out of getting people through charges X number of dollars and sex to let women cross. So it becomes, the crossing of borders becomes very dangerous. And this is again from that, another part of the feminization of migration that it's also very blurry, is the same link that I sent before. I struggled with this for several hours trying to make it more clear, but in any case, I hope you can go to that link and look for this information in more detail, because as I said, I cannot show, I struggled with this and couldn't. But one important point, if you look at the very top yellow thing, there's exploitation and abuse and violence at the border. And we know that many immigrant women, or many women with maybe a generation away from the experience of migration, are among the people who have lost more jobs with a pandemic. Women in general have suffered more from the pandemic than men in terms of losing jobs, because it's whatever jobs they do, which tend to be service jobs. And if you cannot be cleaning a house or taking care of an old person or whatever they do in those kinds of services, Plus also you have to be at home with your kids all the time. There are more chances that you would lose your employment, your income, your financial security. Okay. So this is again from the United Nations, from the same document about violence against women migrant workers. Evidence has shown that during sea crossings, and this is mostly talking about Europe, women and girls are at greater risk of drowning, as they are less likely than men and boys to be able to swim, and their clothes may impede movement. Plus, women's bodies tend to be leaner, and they succumb to hypothermia sooner than men. We've seen these innumerable pictures about the Mediterranean. And if you look, even though they all have lightsaber things, the women are covered in these many bundles of clothes that end up pulling them down. So they're in more chances of drowning. When we hear 7,000 people drowned in the Mediterranean, probably a big chunk of those were women. Okay, the third stage is the stage of acculturation and adaptation, and that in some ways lasts all your life. But still, it's the time when you learn to live in the new country, and it has a lot to do with how the new country reacts to you. So attitudes towards immigrants and refugees change with political winds. And the undesirables of last century are the respectable citizens of today, presented in contrast to the new immigrants. And you see the little cartoon on the side, this guy saying it's time to reclaim America from illegal immigrants. And then this Native American says, okay, you pack. Because at some point, either we or our ancestors were impinging in their territory. Seeking asylum is not illegal, regardless of what we have heard in the last 4 years. Migration is not a crime, and migration has been criminalized in the last few years, as if they were doing something that it's illegal, that it's wrong. And it's never been so, except again, there have been negative perspectives about immigrants. So barriers to migration actually do not discourage the migration, but rather increase the criminality, money of the smugglers, while endangering the human rights to life and the safety of immigrants, particularly women and girls. And this is a cover from the New Yorker during the time when there was the beginning of the separation of families. And this is the same woman whose picture we saw before, again, after seeking asylum, looking for asylum, there's a lot of trauma that many women from Central America experience. And this is also from the New Yorker. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, but only the good ones. And this is again from the UN. Far from being job stealers or an economic burden, migrants contribute to the economy of the countries of reception. We live in California. If they were not migrants picking up fruit, the economy of the state of California will go down considerably. And the contributions of migrants to the world are more in countries where balances the deficit of workers created by the aging population, lower fertility rates, aging and lower fertility rate, which it's happening in Europe, and it's also happening very much so in this country, because the population is aging and the fertility rates are going down. I read something in the New Yorker this morning that during this past year of pandemic, the birth rate has been reduced by around 300,000. And what happens with that, if you don't have a reasonably educated population, reasonable numbers, earning reasonable amounts of money, the older population will not have Social Security, because our Social Security is paid by those who are working now. So if the population is of people who are earning less, or the population is reduced, the amount in the Social Security fund gets reduced, and the older population then suffers. So the migrants, and there's, we can think about other things migrants do, but basically they're sustaining a lot of economies. Okay, now, gender and sexuality are very present in immigration laws. Immigration laws all over the world, but we're going to try to focus on the US, reproduce hegemonic racist and sexist discourses. US immigration legislation is based on ideas about gender and sexuality. And we might think, well, maybe on race, but gender and sexuality, yes. Sexuality may seem unimportant in moments of great political and social upheaval. This is a quote from Ana Maria Rodriguez. But when groups such as women immigrants or gays, lesbians, or transgenders are vilified, obliterated, killed, or silenced, the importance of sexuality becomes more evident and urgent. Again, women's sexuality has been at the center of the legislation, but also the enforcement concerning migration. Here's a concrete example. The first restrictive US immigration law, which was the Page Act of 1875, was developed to exclude the Chinese, but specifically Chinese women who were assumed to be prostitutes. Being women and presumably sex determined their exclusion. It was enforced. The Page Act of 1875 was enforced against women coming into the country, Chinese women coming into the country, more than against men, because it was assumed that the men were coming to work and the women were coming prostitutes. So have it, gender and sexuality. That's an example. Another example, in 1907, there was the Expatriation Act revoked the citizenship of US-born women married to foreign men. An American woman who had been born in this country and was a citizen, if you married a foreign man, you lost your citizenship. Men who married foreign women did not lose their citizenship. Okay. Okay, now let's look at what happens with inside the immigrant groups themselves. Groups that are transforming the way of life through a vast and deep process of acculturation frequently focus on preserving cultural traditions almost exclusively through the gender roles of women. And we sort of need to think, why is it the focus on preserving women's roles and controlling their sexuality rather than other aspects of culture and traditions? Concretely, for example, Somali men, when they're in Somalia, they deserve or develop their sense of identity from having goats moved from here to there. If we had people, men, walking goats in the middle of El Cajon Boulevard, we would not be very happy. But if they are practicing genital mutilation of girls, it's their culture, so we don't need to pay attention to that. Well, the goats are also their culture, but the respect and the enforcement and the acceptance of cultural norms tend to be more active when we are considering that what is happening is private, meaning it has to do with women, rather than with the society at large. So we need to think about why are the implications of respecting customs that target mainly women and have serious consequence for the bodily and emotional integrity. Sometimes cultural differences are used as explanatory pretext concerning the gender roles of women all over the world in both majority and minority groups. But cultures are not static. Change and conflict and contradictions exist within culture itself. The mainstream culture in the US changes. And these other cultures also change. They're not static, they're not paralyzed. So when we say, well, it's their culture, we're assuming that there's no conflict and there's no change within those other cultures. And cultural values, mainstream American culture and any other culture, are influenced by power. Those who have power can dictate terms of how and when cultural attitudes would be tolerated or rejected. And it's very important to sort of look at the fact that sensitivity to others' cultural values or toward other cultures does not imply unquestioning acceptance of heteropatriarchal definitions of cultural identities and behaviors. It's an important issue, is how to preserve sensitivity and respect for others who are in the process of adapting to the mainstream culture. And so respect for their cultural differences while continuing to foster liberatory and emancipatory ideas and principles. Okay, as I said, there's much more to say, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. So let's just look at transformations that occur in individual lives through migration, impact the acceptable norms in the countries of origin, and therefore the lives of people who do not migrate. Transnational migrants are transformed by migration, and their new practices and transformations affect the cultural norms, including gender norms, in the nation states of both origin and settlement. Remember, we talked about women sent money, remittances of money from women to their country of origin. And in the process of doing that, they're transforming their countries of origin. Okay, just here you have the covers of the last 3 books I've written that Virginia mentioned at the beginning. And some of you were at my presentations on saints, which are of course from the group, from part of what is in the Women's Sainthood and Power. And there's a number of talks that I'm going to be giving soon. You'll get these in the chat. For Adventure Context Travel, I'm doing something on women's sainthood, ethnicity, and identity in the Americas. And I'm doing also my memoir, and I'm presenting my memoir at Oasis next week. I don't know if you are members of Oasis, but that's another place to do it. This is my email and my webpage. So if you want to ask me questions or look at more things I may have done or whatever, that's that. And now it's time for questions and comments. So I'm going to get out of the sharing screen, and I'm going to start looking at all of you in a more, let's see. I don't know what, I have a very small, oh, here we are, grid video, okay, bigger. Okay, so let's look at questions and whatever else.
Yes, and Oliva, I believe you're still sharing your screen.
I am, okay.
So as she, there
okay.
you are, there you are.
I stopped share, okay.
Please add your questions to the chat and we will get to as many as we can. I did put the link to her infographic at the top. The second one is correct. So let's see, the first question we have is from Kimberly Fernandez. Are the experiences similar for both legal and illegal immigration?
In some ways, yes, absolutely. People who are not documented, people who are undocumented, and some people say using illegal immigrants, it's no human being is illegal. So it's a term we use, I use it myself. But anyway, people who are undocumented have an additional stressor, and it's not knowing what's going to happen to them if they get caught in some ways. And I suppose you heard things like in the last 4 years, like someone went to a hospital to deliver a baby and ICE was there and arrested them and things of that sort. That creates a stress. They don't feel that they have the freedom to go to a hospital or do some things when they're under that stress. But the having to adjust to a new country, the having to learn new ways of being, the sense of loss, of having lost everything that is familiar to you, people you love, etc. It's something that it's shared by everyone who is migrating to another country.
Thank you. We have a few comments. One was complimenting your excellent slides and presentation. There's a comment about a Cuban, a professor who wrote a book, Leaving Cuba. Cuba is Waiting for Snow in Havana by Carlos Ayer.
Yes.
And then we have a question about.
Yeah, let me say something there. Carlos Ayer left Cuba when he was 7 years old. So it's mostly, yes, what a 7-year-old can remember, and then his experience as an immigrant. I left Cuba when I was 22 years old. So my story, it's more a story of being in Cuba rather than an immigrant story, but okay. Yes.
All right, next question. This is from Vicky Hoppenrath. What was happening in the 1980s that she has forgotten that caused such a high migration?
Reagan legalized illegal, undocumented immigrants. The last adjustment of immigration status for people in this country was done by Reagan in the middle of the 80s. So the immigration increased because people who were in the shadows became public. So they were counted better. And it was because then you didn't have to be afraid that, you could, be legalized. So yes, that's why they increased.
Right, the next question is from Cindy Shurick, and I apologize if I mispronounced the last name. The last 4 years politically and the pandemic have left many feeling like we've got a certain amount of PTSD. Then I think of friends at St. Luke's who have been both refugees and secondary immigrants, along with facing the recent attitudes to immigrants and all the uncertainty. Can you speak to how immigrant women deal with stress upon stress upon stress?
Some of them do it well, and some of them don't. People have sort of different psychological strengths. And, the very fact that you have gone to another country and you are trying to do things, it's very stressful, but it also shows a level of strength because, as I said, there are other people living under the same conditions who do not have the courage to leave. But yes, these stresses accumulate one on top of the other, on top of the other. And whatever it is you're doing, being cleaning houses, taking care of old people, working in a supermarket, all those jobs have disappeared. So now, on top of everything, you don't even have any income. And so it becomes much more difficult so how do they do it? Some do it better than others, but most manage somehow.
All right, thank you. Next question is from Virginia Howlett. How can a host country like the US protect women asylum seekers?
Well, for one thing, legislation, some of which is in place already, has to be enforced and applied in a way that conforms to international laws. And part of what started happening with Jeff Sessions is that things like a woman who was running from a situation of violent domestic, a violent domestic environment, he decided that that wasn't enough cause for seeking asylum. So he took that out, and I don't know that it has been restituted. The other thing is this whole thing about Waiting Mexico, or whatever the name of that program is, puts women in a very difficult position because these people are living in tents. And, think refugee camps are notorious for sexual violations against women, because when you're living in a tent, anyone can crawl in and rape you. And that's, that's the reality of the context in which many of them are living. And right now, I don't know of concrete things right now, but I know that years ago with Cambodian refugees and Laotian refugees, the guards in the camp in Thailand were raping women. So the people who were there to protect you were taking advantage of you, and you didn't have any place to go. You couldn't tell anyone the guard did this because the guard had all the power over you.
I can answer the question of domestic violence, if I could. I'm not sure if you know about Casa Cornelia. I'm an pro bono interpreter, and I was on a case that was a domestic violence case. It was finally settled in favor of the client. There had just been one before ours got settled that I lured the lawyer to, that was a Peruvian woman escaping domestic violence, in spite of that, removing that as a reason for seeking asylum. And the other thing that helps immigrants that are hiding here, unfortunately, is if you become a victim of violence, you are now eligible for visas. For example, T visa if you've been trafficked, U visa if you're a victim of crime, and a special visa for women called VAWA. It's Victims Against Violence. Violence Against Women Act. And that means that you are married to a man who is either a legal resident or a US citizen who abuses you, and then you are eligible.
All that is, thank you for the information. All that is true. And Casa Cornelia does an excellent job. And there are other venues that also do a very good job around that. But still, the situation, it's very difficult. And any of those cases are not solved in 3 days. Sometimes they take years to go through the process. So it's a very difficult situation. Okay, another question.
Next question. This is from Simone. Why is dual citizenship so problematic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on what country there is and how is it problematic. I mean, maybe it's problematic in that people take it like the person is not completely faithful to this country or something of that sort. I mean, it's hard to tell, but I'm not sure what, for who is the double citizenship problematic. I mean, it has to do maybe with attitudes more than with what it's legal. So, yeah.
All right, next question is from Kirby. And she's asking, did I hear correctly that the women who are sending money back to their country of origin are increasing the quality of education of young people in that country?
Yes. And the quality of life. I mean, houses get reconstructed, and people who, I remember some years ago in Portugal, driving through Portugal, there was these very pretty painted houses. And the tour guide said, these are houses that were hovels, and they have become nice little houses with money sent from people who are all over the world, Brazil in this case, because it was Portugal, or New Bedford in Massachusetts, or whatever, sending money there. And so these villages have better ways of living, better toilets, better, water supply, etc. So it improves the lives of people in the country of origin. And it improves also when my aunt is in some other country and she's going to school, or she's sending money, sending that she's interested in me going to school or whatever, it sort of improves the desire in the country of origin for people to improve their lives there without having to leave.
Thank you. The next one is, are there any local support groups for immigrant women? And this comes from Malvina.
Yes, there are. And there are different kinds of groups. I don't have that from the top of my head. One of the places is the Jewish Family Services, offers a number of groups for, and many churches have services for immigrants. So there are different things. Yes.
Okay, next question is from Stacy. How can we reduce the social isolation for immigrant women and other marginalized newcomers?
How can we change the world? I mean, it's how can we reduce it? And particularly in the moments we are living right now, where social isolation becomes a way of saving your life. I mean, I've been alone in this apartment for a whole year. And every so often I see a neighbor across the hallway. But that, yeah, right. That's about it. Or a friend shops for me. I'm now fully vaccinated, and my great adventure was going to Costco by myself. Okay, so how do you reduce isolation of people? In providing opportunities for people to get together. But in the present circumstances, opportunities for getting together are not easy. And we hope that that is going to somehow change. But it's, of course, very important to be able to talk to people who speak your language, who understand where you came from, who share things with you, who share music that you both like, or dishes, or, who remember details about your town. I mean, all these things. And of course, we are privileged that we have this. We have, as much as we may not like seeing other people just in little squares, we are seeing people in little squares, at least. And for me, it's been sustaining. I mean, being in groups as a participant or a presenter or being in liturgy at church or whatever, thank God for this. But if you're a poor person who cannot afford a computer, who does not understand English to install these kinds of programs, even these ways of avoiding isolation are practically inaccessible.
Thank you.
Oh, you skipped my
Next.
question
Oh, I'm sorry, Monique.
about the
go ahead.
1907 law. How long did that go on?
Okay, go ahead with that one then.
What
It
was
was
that?
the 1907 law that made you, it took away your citizenship if you were a woman marrying a foreign man, because I'm married to a foreigner. And I wondered how long that law went on. Is it still on the books, or was it finally rescinded?
No, it's not on the books anymore. I think it was rescinded sometime after Second World War.
Second World War.
I'm not absolutely sure of when it was rescinded, but yes, it's not in
Okay,
in
that's
effect
good.
now.
So I'm still
Yeah.
a citizen. All right, thank you.
Yeah, you are still a citizen, yes.
All
Okay.
right, Oliva, the next question comes from Caroline. Can you say something about Muslim immigration, Sikhs, perhaps?
Well, again, that they have the additional thing of religious difference, which is, and all the prejudice that you think if you're a Muslim, you're a terrorist, and all these reactions that people have. And Sikhs are not Muslim. Sikhs are Sikhs. It's a completely different religion.
I apologize. That was just how I did the question.
No,
It
no,
wasn't
I
separate
understand. No,
question.
no, no.
Okay.
I'm not saying anything about you. I'm saying about people's general attitudes. Sikhs are not Muslims. It's a religion in itself. So so it's very hard to have people get that you can have a different religion and that doesn't make you into a strange. I mean, in the mid to late 19th century, even to the beginning of the 20th century, being Jewish or being Catholic, people were saying these people could never be American citizens. They would not know how to be American citizens. And nobody would say now that if you're Catholic or if you're Jewish, you cannot be a citizen. But the perception at that time was that. And so the perception is that these people are so different, so foreign, that they really don't fit well. Yes and no, you know. But of course, I mean, if you're Christian, if you celebrate Christmas and Easter, there are more chances that you can feel comfortable within the context of American society, that if you come from another society or another group where these are not the important holidays, but other holidays that are completely unimportant here. So that's another adjustment you have to make.
Okay, the next, I'd like to ask Penny to unmute herself. She has some comments about dual citizenship and also a resource for refugee women.
Okay, good.
Hello, Professor Espin. Es un placer conocerte.
Okay.
I put what I wanted to say in the chat so that I wouldn't have to interrupt the conversation. But somebody was asking about dual citizenship. Why is it problematic? And not all countries that have treaties that allow dual citizenship with the US.
Right,
and I know
right.
when I became a citizen, and I am an immigrant, as you can probably tell from my accent, I had to swear an oath to abjure all foreign princes and potentates.
Yes.
So technically, I had to give up any right to dual citizenship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But it's acceptable with some countries where there's the treaty and all that.
Well, they didn't actually ask for my British passport back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, the next question comes from Rosie. And this is regarding a recent bestseller, American Dirt. It portrays a mom and son migrating from Mexico. What is your opinion of this story?
I have not read the story, so I have no opinion. But I can say that reading stories, any kind of stories about people who are different from us, usually helps us understand some things that when you're hearing speeches about it, it doesn't have the same impact as when you are reading a novel, any kind of novel. And so memoirs and novels are a very good way of getting an understanding of what happens, what people go through, how people feel it, etc. So yeah, so I don't know that specific novel, but in general, I like novels because they illuminate things. Novels and memoirs, as I say, illuminate things that when you're reading a theoretical thing, you don't get it. So, okay.
Okay, the last few, we have some comments. One is from Vicky regarding her grandmother from Italy, who was never able to see her parents or siblings again.
Mhm.
And then we have one from Barbara Wilder. It's cultural anthropology should be a standard class in all schools.
Mhm.
And then I believe that is it for questions, unless I missed one.
I had one actually. It's Sharon.
Hi, Sharon. Go ahead.
I have to find it now actually in the chat. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed it. Would you like to just ask it now?
I was interested in what you thought about why it is that women are the people that maintain the cultural history when they move to a different country. I mean, I can speak to that personally. I'm from the UK, and my husband is basically quite happy to leave everything behind. But I think generally, you know, not just you know, from Europe, but from other countries, it's the women that drive that rather than the men. I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, in general, women tend to be the more direct transmitters of culture, even when you're not migrating anywhere. Tend to be the ones that tells you the stories and sing you the little songs, and you know, in any kind of cultural context. And that tends to be true for migration. And nothing is ever 100% what it is. There, you know, there are variations about how that would be. So, but yes, in general, in all cultural contexts, even without migration, it tends to be women who are transmitting culture. And by the way, right now, pretty migrants from Europe to the US are coming from the UK. So, you know, it's just a detail way.
I'm sorry, what from the US or UK? What was that again?
The majority of immigrants from Europe to the US now, at this
Yeah.
point in history, are usually from the UK.
Thank you. Thank you.
The majority of immigrants are not coming from Europe at this point. As I showed, the majority of immigrants are now coming from Latin America,
Yes.
followed by Asia. But from Europe, the country that is sending more people to the US is the UK.
Uh-huh. Okay. Thank you.
Well, it's time, I think, to wrap up. We had a lot of wonderful questions. And one thing that Penny didn't mention is that she posted about RefugeeNet, which is based at St. Luke's. And those of you who don't know about it, who are working with refugees. So RefugeeNet, it's an Episcopal organization based at St. Luke's in San Diego that is doing really great work. So thank you so much, Oliva. This has just been such a revelation. I'm amazed at all the statistics and the knowledge and the depth of information you've conveyed in such a short time. It's really been something, and I think it got us all thinking. I certainly am. I'm an immigrant too, and it's just the connections that you made between the people that are here who are immigrants, or their parents were, or their grandparents were immigrants, to the immigrants today, and allowing us to have some sympathy for their experiences and connection with that. It's just been a marvelous talk. Very thought-provoking. I'll be thinking about it and following up on the research. I know many others will be here as well. I wanted to let everybody know we'll be sending out a version of the chat to everybody, so that you'll get those links to the talks that Dr. Espin is giving, and to some of the other references that people were talking about, the novel, etc. So we'll send that out to everybody who signed up. Everybody who got the Zoom link, you'll get a copy of the chat.
What about the slides?
No, the slides we won't be sending out.
Okay.
We don't usually send out our speaker slides because those are her intellectual property. But we'll be sending you the chat, and you can sign up and go to some of her other talks if you're interested, because she does speak quite widely and is a sought after speaker. Thank you so much, Oliva. We just really, really appreciate it. And so now, thank you. I'm gonna shift the gears just a little bit and begin to sort of end our evening. I want to remind everybody that we would like you to donate. We are not providing wine and dinners, which is our main source of income at Women Together. So if you like these programs, please go to our webpage. There is a button at the bottom that says donate now, and any amount is appreciated. We'll be sending out our online evaluation. It was also posted on the chat, and that is very useful to us. So please do fill that out. We're really always looking for suggestions for talks and speakers for next year. If you'd like to volunteer, and any of your thoughts and comments about this evening is very, very important to us. We read every one that comes in. There will be a video recording of the Zoom, as we mentioned in the beginning, posted on the Cathedral website, which is a first for Women Together. So that's going to be great. I think a lot of people who couldn't make it will look forward to that. And so check the Women Together webpage, at least not for a few days. We have to give the Cathedral staff a little time to get it posted on the site. So in April, we are not going to have a Women Together event because of Easter. But in May, we'll be holding our last event of this season. And it is going to be another fascinating talk, very different. But Dr. Emily Reimer-Berry, who is the associate professor and the chair currently of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of San Diego, is going to talk about becoming anti-racist, reflections from a white Christian on the sin of racism. So I think this is going to be a fascinating talk from a very reflective, learned, and amazing woman. So becoming anti-racist, reflections from a white Christian on the sin of racism. And that is the first Thursday of May. So check the Women Together webpage, and publicity will be going out in April for.
Do you have
for that.
February's? Have you recorded February's, or you're just starting to record?
No, this is the first night. This is
First
the
one,
first
okay.
time we recorded Women Together.
Okay, thank you.
It's all new for us, but
Okay.
it's because the cathedral staff has been able to take it on, and we have to give them a lot of credit for
Okay.
taking on that extra work for us. So thank you again to the cathedral staff and to all the volunteers who made this happen, especially Terry, who was moderating the chat, and Kimberly. And thank you again to Oliva. We just so appreciated having you here and really enjoyed everything that you told us about. And so in conclusion, let us pray. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for the invitation and for being such an appreciative audience.
And we'll leave the session open for about 5 minutes for anybody who wants to stay and talk or ask a question of Oliva.
Can you put the Oasis link to your talk next week about your homeland? I have a friend whose mother grew up in Cuba, and I think she'd be quite interested.
Okay, I don't have it now because I took it off to come to the session. So, but if you go to the Oasis network or the
Okay.
Oasis webpage, is class number 243.
243. Okay, thank you.
And it's Monday at 10 in the morning.
Monday. Okay, 243. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, Senora, that you just kept bringing back floods of memories, because I've been involved with Casa Cornelia since 2014, and I have dealt with men, women, and children, both with immigration and refugees from both Africa, because I speak French as well, and all of the Americas from Mexico on down. And so many things that you said about the perils of their crossing and all the things that happened to them along the way. I've heard those stories up close and personal. So it was it kind of got me a little choked up when you were talking about it.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Those are powerful stories.
Yes. Yes. And
Nancy's waving.
Yeah, I was waving back to her.
and been many, many times before the pandemic down to the Otay Detention Center when we had to meet face to face with certain clients to get things signed and what have you. So it's been a real eye opener. I've learned so much about what's going on in other countries. And when I see the masses coming to the border, it's like I know them, even if I don't know them personally, because I've heard their stories through others. And I just wish more Americans would just understand what these people are fleeing from. It's just unbelievable horrors that they're trying to get away from, and we need to have more compassion.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Oliva or other thoughts? Oh, Kimberly posted the Oasis link in the chat.
Yeah, I saw it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimberly.
The only other thing that really took me by surprise was just before the pandemic, we had 2 clients from the African country of Mauritania that were escaping, get this, slavery. There's a law against it on the books, but it's not enforced. And the stories that I heard were straight out of the Civil War South. I mean, I couldn't believe this was going on in this day and age. So a lot of people don't know that. I didn't know that. So I'm sure a lot of people didn't know that either. And we were succeeded in getting asylum for the 2 that I worked with. So I was really happy about that.
That's great.
Okay.
Monique, could you, before we go, could you put the name of that organization in the chat? For
Sure.
anybody who is getting the chat and they maybe want to support it or find out more about it.
Right. They're always looking for interpreters. My husband's trying to find a Dutch interpreter right now. A while back. he
Monique,
found-
I might know somebody.
Oh,
Okay.
How, should he go through Cornelia?
yes. If you know somebody, contact Casa Cornelia. It's right across the street from the cathedral.
Right, I actually was trying to volunteer there before the pandemic. I'm an attorney and I
Oh,
was
wonderful.
I
'Cause
was
all the-
hoping to do it, but it just didn't
Yeah.
pan out.
Okay, what they're doing right now is Zoom and phone
Mhm.
interviews because we can't be in the same room together right now. And I've done some by Zoom.
Okay, well,
from my house.
a friend of mine was actually a paralegal, retired from Holland. So I will contact him and ask him to contact Casa Cornelia.
Perfect. Recently, we had to find a native language in Mexico because there are sometimes people who come here don't speak Spanish. They speak their indigenous language. And my husband was able to find somebody. In another case, they got an interpreter who knew that indigenous language in Spanish. And we did one of those relays like in I Love Lucy, you know, they'd speak English, I'd speak
Mhm.
Spanish, he'd speak indigenous, back and forth we went. It was really fun. I love that kind of stuff. Did that with a friend, African as well, because there's African languages. And we had a former client that came in to help out and he spoke the Pular language and French. And I knew French and English. And so we did the relay that way, English, French, Pular, French, English, back and forth. So we manage, we find a way to manage.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that work, Monique. I'm sure it's very valuable.
It's very fulfilling. It's very rewarding.
I
And so
think-
far, every asylum case that I've been on, we won. So that's a good
That's
feeling.
good. Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
I think probably Oliva is tired now and
I can't
Okay.
figure
Go have
this is-
dinner.
how to get
Yeah,
on or
yes.
off, so.
time to go have dinner. Okay, thank
is
you
so
again.
Thank you
so
to
much.
all of you.
Thank you so much.
Take
Yeah.
care.
Perfect.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you for the
Okay.
invitation again. Okay,
Bye-bye.
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 I hope to see you, some of you in some of my other talks. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.